Welcome to Methodical Cubing Podcast. Trangium.
Right.
Oh yeah, you can introduce yourself a little bit about what you've done. That would be a good idea.
All right. I'm Trangium. I got into method development like through the why Ruru and Meta is like how I got into method development. I've been cubing for a long time, and then when I got down to around like 15 seconds, like I actually went on the speed solving wiki for like a lot of algorithms. And then like one day I just decided to drop the wiki from the URL. And then that introduced me to the speed solving community. And I found these methods that were really interesting. And so I decided like maybe I'm going to try to contribute to that. And then as I contributed more, I got better at like understanding like what makes a good method and what the method community needed. So, and then that turned into me making the MCC, batch solver, Triforce, Squall, like all the other developments that I've done.
Okay, cool. Is it kind of rare for a CFOP solver to be in development of other methods? And what got you into method development? You kind of already answered this. You found the speed solving forum and found some posts about methods, more specifically Mehta and Wairuru.
Yeah, it is rare for a CFOP solver to be into development of other methods, but it is also like kind of rare for solvers not to use CFOP. So, I use CFOP not because like I'm just a boring person. I use CFOP because like that's what I started with, and like even though like I'm into development of other methods, that's not because I'm trying to be edgy. It's just because I find it interesting.
So you stated some time ago that you haven't switched to another method because you haven't seen a method that's better than CFOP. Has your opinion changed on this? And are there any methods that you think could be competitive to CFOP?
For me to switch to another method at this point, like it would have to be like indisputably, unambiguously better than CFOP by a significant amount. And like there are quite a few methods that are like on the same caliber as CFOP, like Ru, maybe slightly better. APB could be on the same caliber. Even Petrus might be on the same caliber, but I haven't found any methods that are like way better than CFOP. So because I've done CFOP for so long, I've like kind of gotten used to like the freedom of like being able to do any pair. You might think CFOP, freedom, what, those don't go together, but like I'm just so used to it now that like you might think it's a sunk cost fallacy that I'm not switching to another method. And it kind of is a sunk cost, but it's not really a fallacy. Because like CFOP is like not a bad method. CFOP is like, I would say pretty on par with the top methods. So because there's not a method that is like unambiguously better, I'm not going to switch. I'm not saying this to discourage other people from using methods other than CFOP, but that's just my experience, my opinion.
I'm just curious. You didn't mention ZZ anywhere in like your methods that you thought were comparable with CFOP. Is there any?
This is by no means a complete list. There are probably like 20 methods that are comparable to CFOP, and yeah, ZZ would probably be one of them.
Okay, I was just wondering whether it was like you maybe had anything against ZZ, or I mean, obviously you've developed things for EO, last layer methods. Our next question is about Squall. What inspired Squall?
So Squall was a method that was designed for the second method development competition. So Squall is a top-down method, meaning I started with the last steps and worked backwards. So I wanted the last step to be 2gen because 2gen is really fast, but I didn't want like people to have to do mid-solve CP recognition because that's pretty slow. And I didn't want to do CP and inspection because that also limits your possibilities a lot. So in order to satisfy both of those constraints, the last alg set had to be something like that had some number of edges left and all the corners were solved. So either L5 EP, L6 EP, EPLL. And I decided on L5 EP because any fewer, and there's just like too few algs in the set, which kind of makes it like seem like a waste. Because like if, for example, if EPLL is your last alg set, there's probably another way to distribute the algs so that they're like more balanced. For example, COLL EPLL is 46 algs, but OCLL PLL is only 28, and that tends to lead to less efficient solutions. And L6 EP, that's too many edges. The alg count is only 93, but there are a lot of cases that take like 18 to 20 moves. So L5 EP is in the sweet spot. It's 16 algs and pretty much all of the cases are good. And then after I decided the last step was L5 EP, the next to last step lended itself naturally. Like I decided on L5 EP with the U edges unsolved and DR edge unsolved because that had the best algs. So naturally, the second to last step should be a form of COLL that is allowed to disturb the DR edge. To get to that state, I decided to like have an intermediate state of EO 2x2x3, because then the next steps could just be the back pair and front pair. And you have the DR edge free, so you can use that freedom. And then I had to decide, how do you get to EO 2x2x3? Well, the step before that I decided was to like put in the DF and DB edges, because that could be done using just R, U, and wide R, which is still a good move set. So now I had to decide how to get to EO plus first block. And that's, in my opinion, too much to do in inspection, so I had to split it up. So I decided to split it up to EO square and the FL pair. And then basically by working backwards, I made the Squall method.
So other methods have started with EO 2x2x2. EO square definitely is an easier start, I think, and a cool improvement. However, I feel like either start is going to be probably too difficult to do an inspection practically. Although I do know guys that are doing it and have done it. How practical do you think EO first and EO first methods are while simultaneously positioning a corner?
Well, EO cross has been proven to be possible to do consistently in inspection, and that's EO and 4 edges, whereas EO square is 2 edges and a corner. So the question is one corner gonna make it increase in difficulty more than 2 edges? And I think it's about equal. One corner would increase the difficulty about as much as 2 edges. So if that is true, then EO square would be practical, although pretty difficult. If you wanted like a start with EO and only edges, you could do like an EO line on the left and then place like the DL like 1x1x3 of pieces, but that like could have bad look ahead because there's too many unsolved pieces in the D layer. So I decided with I tried to start with EO square.
Yeah, as a mention on this, most of the time people who do EO cross do EO and solve 2 edges of the cross and then set up the other 2 nicely, which lends itself well to EO square, which is similar. You set up these 2 edges, or you set up the edge and a pair possibly. I find it slightly less difficult than trying to insert 2 edges versus just inserting 1 corner when I'm using this method.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think if you just do EO and then the 2 adjacent edges, that makes it a bit more inefficient because you have to like disturb the edge to solve the corner. But a very EO and one edge while trying to track the pair is definitely a good approach.
Yep. Now we're on to Triforce questions. How practical do you think it would be to apply the concepts of the Triforce method to larger even numbered n by n's, such as 6x6 and 8x8?
I mean, Triforce generalizes pretty nicely to the even n by n's. So like on 4x4, you start with a 2x3x4 block. And so on 6x6, instead it would be, instead of 2x3x4, it would be 3x5x6, I think. Yeah, 3x5x6. And then that generalizes. So you have the R face and then half of the, like the U slice that takes up half of the cube that is still free. And then you just have to do, like for 6x6, you do last 6 wings twice. For 8x8, you do last 6 wings 3 times, and so on. And that actually, that's actually really nice because like for 6x6, for example, there's 2 OLL parities and 1 PLL parity you can get. By doing last 6 wings twice, one for the inner wings and one for the outer wings, you manage to avoid both parities. And so you only, for any even n by n, you only have the PLL parity to deal with, which isn't even that bad. It's only 5 moves. And then another pretty nice thing is, interestingly, like as you get higher and higher n by n's, like 6x6, 8x8, 10x10, you never need more than 6 M prime U2M triggers in 5v5x. So as the M by N gets bigger and bigger, 5v5x actually becomes like more and more efficient, like more and more bang for your buck. So I should probably explain like that Triforce is a method that was made for one of the last method development competition, and basically it starts with a 2x3x4, and then you like make the remaining half centers. At least on 4x4, it was designed for 4x4. You make the remaining half centers, and then you pair up the U and D edges, and while orienting them, and then all of your E slice edges will be on the E slice. Then you do last 6 wings, and all of the algorithms are pretty efficient because you have the half centers still free. And this is the step that avoids OLL parity along with 5v5x. And then you solve the corners, and then you're left with 5v5x, which is basically you have the U edges and the DR edge, and then you have the half centers still to fix. But you can do that pretty efficiently using M prime U to M, which swaps 3 edges and 2 centers, along with U and YDU moves. These concepts would generalize pretty well to even cubes, although to odd cubes, it becomes a little bit more annoying and a little bit less rewarding because there are fewer parities to avoid.
Right. I suppose we should probably just give an overview of the steps of Squall and Triforce. Squall begins with EO 2x2x1, or EO square. This is generally in the back left, like a first block would be in root, but in the back. And then you add a pair to that while preserving EO, so all that comes with that. And then you solve that stripe, but you don't have to do EO like in LEOR. So that makes the stripe significantly easier. Then you just solve the 2 pairs on the right, you do the corners, and you do the last 5 edges, permute. With Triforce, as Trangium mentioned, you solve a 2x3x4 in the bottom 2 layers and the left 3 layers, if that helps. It which limits you to U wide 2 moves and then right moves. And then you would proceed to solve half centers and pair up the U and D edges. So you still have these 6 wings left in the middle, the belt, the equator area. And then those are solved by reducing it to last 4 wings or last 5 wings, though the last 5 wings isn't fully developed yet, if I remember correctly.
I mean, last 5 wings, like the tricky thing with Triforce is you actually can't generate the algorithms very well. Like the current programs to generate algorithms, Cube Explorer, Batch Solver, can't generate algorithms for last 6 wings. So I had to generate them by hand. And so that means I'm constantly finding better algs for certain cases. And there are actually there's a lot of different ways you can approach last 6 wings. Like as he mentioned, you can do last 4 wings, last 5 wings, but you can also solve the last 4 wings, but with 2 wings swapped, and then those give you better algs. And there's even more complicated approaches that are beyond the scope of this podcast.
Right. Yeah. If you want more of that, I would recommend joining the Trangium Discord, where we have a couple of channels dedicated to the Triforce method and to the Squall method, if that interests you. After solving these 6 wings in any of the ways that we have listed, you continue to, I forgot.
Yeah, you just
Okay.
solve the 6 corners. The recommended approach is to solve the 2 corners on the bottom, either intuitively, or you can learn all 80 algs. And then you would solve the top 4 corners using COLL, but you're allowed to disturb the DR edge.
And then you get to the best step of the method, 5e5x, in which you solve the half centers and the edges. There's a couple of, for each of the 16 cases, I believe there are, you have an angle which you would execute the M prime U2 M trigger from, and that will swap your half centers on the front and move you to the next case and eventually to the solved case. This is really fun to do because you set up the half centers and then you AUF again to set up to the angle for the actual edges, and then you do it, and I cannot describe to you how fun that last step is. It's a true joy. Thank you for creating it.
All right. Well, the next question is, I think a lot of people, you were speaking earlier about sunk cost. I think a lot of people, put a lot of time and effort into their 3x3 solving method, and there's some appeal to reduction because it always ends in a 3x3 stage. Do you see Triforce becoming popular for 4x4 despite its lack of a supporting, 3x3 method?
So one of the main selling points of Triforce is that you don't have OLL parity. So that could attract some solvers. The real best part of Triforce though is not necessarily for its merit in speed solving, which is it could be good for speed solving, but it's not proven yet. The main thing that's good about Triforce is that it's a really fun and unique method for people that are looking for something different. So Triforce and Redux, and I guess Redux and Yao would fall into kind of the same category here. They occupy 2 completely different niches. Redux and Yao are for people who just want more of the same stuff. And Triforce is for people who want something really different, unique, and fun. So as for the popularity of Triforce, who knows? There's still a lot that can be developed in Triforce, and it's a good question. I don't know.
It is unfortunate that it is not a speed solving method. However, the next question is about the speed solving capabilities of Triforce. For some, actually, this is for me more specifically. I hope I'm not the only one with this problem. The middle steps of Triforce being the steps between the first block, that large block that's built, and until you get to the point where you're solving the 6 corners and the edges and half centers at the end, are a bit cumbersome for look ahead and speed solving, simply because they're very different, and look ahead is difficult for me when pairing the edges and also creating the half centers specifically. And as I've mentioned before, there's some approaches to the last four wings that are more efficient and some that are better for look ahead. And finding this balance is difficult. So what are the alternatives for like reaching that cube state where you're solving the corners and the edges? Just like that would be better for speed solving, at least that you can think of.
Okay, so like let's say you started out with a 2x3x4. I guess like in for example Yao and Redux, just or more specifically Yao, half centers is a pretty established method for solving the centers more efficiently. So if you wanted to like do it in a more like professional way, you could use the half centers. You could use the way that Yao does half centers. It's kind of the same. Like in Yao, you only have the white and yellow centers and a few edges. So in Yao, how half centers works is you solve like three half centers on one slice, and then you solve the matching three half centers on the other slice. So if you wanted to make look ahead easier, you might just choose to filter out like the centers on the right, and then you won't get any annoying cases at the end, although that might be a little bit less efficient. And we know that this like could be a good approach because it's already established, like it's already an established method for doing the centers in Yao. As for pairing like the U edges, it may seem cumbersome at first. The key really is to notice which wings end up on the left, because those are the wings that are probably most likely going to end up pairing with something else. So whenever you do a wide U move, you really want to notice if there are wings that are going in the going to the left, and by left I mean like on the left and also in the equator slice, because whenever you have a U or D wing in one of those spots, it's going to be really easy to end up pairing it with its corresponding wing. But I can't really think of any way to like completely sidestep those steps, because it just seems like the natural way to do it.
When you were mentioning those annoying cases for those last two centers or the half centers at the end, when you're doing the half centers step, there's those annoying cases where you have like where you have all half centers and then two that are not working together. I did have like a kind of solution for that worked out in my head, but I've since forgot it. Maybe I'll come up with it later today and write it down and put it in the Discord, just in case people want to use that approach. I figured everyone else had already like seen that problem and figured out their own way, but maybe others haven't. Yeah, I remember it now. Okay, yeah, you would get like diagonal, you would get like a checkered board at the end as opposed to getting two lines, and that was a little annoying. Anyway, yeah, I just thought I'd say that.
Yeah, I mean the checkerboard case, like it's usually going to be like 3 extra moves usually, but it's kind of just annoying because you have to like find where the blue centers are, and then and by blue I mean whatever color is on the right. You have to find where the right centers are, and then you have to break up stuff that you've already done. So actually it might be 7 extra moves if you don't see it until the end. So yeah, that's bad for like move count and look ahead because you have to look for specific pieces. So in order to avoid that, you could use like how they do it in Yao, or you could like there might be a way to avoid the checkerboard case, but it's probably best to I mentioned in the Triforce document to at least leave one of the right center bars unpaired until the end, because that drastically decreases the chance you'll get that case. but it might be easier for lookahead just to disregard both of them so you can easily filter.
Yeah, I might have even had a way to avoid it every time, but I don't know. I had a simple solution, and I think it was only 1, 2, 3. There's 4 moves to get to half centers from the checkerboard case, depending on whether you got a certain one or not. But anyway, moving on to void swap. We should probably describe this method, I suppose, for our listeners.
Yeah.
Okay, so void swap is, if you're familiar with how other blindfolded methods work, is you have an algorithm such as T-perm that swaps 2 edges. It also swaps 2 corners, but you ignore the corner swap. And then you have an algorithm such as a modified Y-perm that swaps 2 corners and 2 edges, and then you ignore the swap of the 2 edges. And by just swapping 2 pieces at a time, and you can track the cycles that the pieces form beforehand and solve 1 piece at a time through these 2 swaps. So the problem with old Pacman is that I mentioned that the edges algorithm swaps 2 corners. That means that you have to basically get like any edge to the LUS position without disturbing those 2 corners. And for some cases, that can result in pretty long setups or just straight up annoying setups that might not even have good finger tricks. So to combat that problem, instead, of course, you can't just have a 2 edge swap, but what you can have is an alg that swaps 2 edges and cycles 4 centers. So it is way easier to make sure that the centers don't move around as opposed to making sure 2 corners don't move around. Because to make sure that 2 corners don't move around, you restricted yourself to D, L, and slice moves. If you want to make sure the centers don't move around, you have a lot more options. You just can't use slice moves or moves that disturb. You just need to get the edges you need to swap to their correct positions. You don't need to worry about disturbing any corners. And on top of that, the algorithm to swap 2 edges and 4 centers is only 10 moves and pretty finger trickable, as opposed to a T-perm, 14 moves and very finger trickable. So you get something that's more efficient and easier than old Pacman. The only potential hurdle is that the 10 move algorithm you need to swap the 2 edges and 4 centers has slice moves, so, which could be hard for some beginners, but that can be remedied just by doing it over and over again. And then it also requires another different swapping algorithm for corners, but that's not really the essence of void swap. The essence of void swap is the 2 edge 4 center cycling algorithm. There are some cases where you have the 2 edge 4 center cycling algorithm. If you don't do it a multiple of 4 times, you'll always do it a multiple of 2 times, because if you do it an odd number of times, you'll end up with one like residual swap. This is called parity. If you have this swap, you just add an S to your memo, I think. So you'll always have an even number of swaps. But if it's not a multiple of 4, you will have the centers needing to cycle. But luckily, the solution for this is just M prime, S prime, M2, S, M prime. Only 5 moves. So still more efficient than old Pacman, but not as efficient as M2, because instead of a 10 move swapping algorithm, M2 is just a 1 move swapping algorithm.
So in comparison, like compared to old Pacman or M2, where would void swap fall as a replacement method for either of those?
Void swap is better than old Pacman, but a little bit worse than M2, just because M2 manages to swap the 2 edges in 1 move, although there are some special cases. the special cases for M2 prevent it from really being a beginner blind method, because for a beginner, you really want as little to think about as possible. So this is also another point in favor of void swap for a beginner method. The longer your setups are, the more you have to remember this, which setups you did. And for me, at least, that was really hard when I was learning how to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfold, just remembering the setups and remembering how to undo them correctly. For void swap, the setups are usually like, they average less than 2 moves, and there's no setup that requires more than 3 moves, as opposed to old Pacman, which sometimes, like often requires 3 move setups and sometimes even requires 4 move setups. So because of that, void swap could potentially be hard to visualize because of the 4 centers moving around, and but it still has fewer special cases than M2. Only really 1 special case for that when you have to do M prime, S prime, M2, S, M prime, whereas M2 has like 4 different special cases. So yeah, void swap better than old Pacman, but worse than M2 just because it's less efficient than M2.
And do you think that void swap will end up replacing old Pacman, or is that not likely because of, I don't know, some of the cumbersome algorithms, or perhaps the improvements to old Pacmans, such as using JA perm and JB perm as well as T perm, so that all of your letters can be set up in 2 moves or less?
I think void swap will be a method alongside old Pacman. One of the advantages of old Pacman is that you already know the algorithms, like T perm, modified Y perm, and the Purdy alg is just an R perm. So most cubers will already know what those algs are, as opposed to void swap, where all of the algs are completely new, which could lead some people to do old Pacman just because of familiarity. So I don't think void swap will fully replace it. It will just be alongside it. And regarding your point on old Pacman having the extra, you can do JA or JB perm. That does significantly reduce the length of setups. So it could work well for some people. Just personally for me, I found it like kind of hard to visualize when you do when you do T perm, JA perm, or JB perm, at least at first. Now I kind of know better how it works, but just having one alg that gives you short setups for everything, I think is a lot simpler, at least in my opinion, for someone who's just new to blind methods. And also, there are different swapping algorithms that swap 2 edges and 4 centers. There's the normal 10 move one, but if you move the first 2 moves of the algorithm to the end, you get another valid algorithm that swaps 2 edges and 4 centers, except it swaps a different 2 edges and 4 centers. So there are probably ways you can reduce your setups using void swap as well as in old Pacman.
Excellent. Thanks for listening to Methodical Cubing's interview of Trangium, Part 1. In Part 1, we discussed the methods that Trangium has created. And in Part 2, we're going to discuss the smaller things that he's created, algorithm sets, smaller finishing touches to other methods. And in Part 3, we'll be discussing his software developments, which have been monumental for the method development community. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.